Hey folks, today I wanted to introduce a new piece of content called Kick the Cardboard, and the whole idea of this content segment is to look at 5 or so Kickstarter games, have a very brief overview of these games, maybe talk about some of my thoughts, impressions of these games, and stimulate some discussion around Kickstarter and Kickstarter games. Now, I know that Kickstarter has a sort of a mixed reputation within the board gaming community. From a lot of you folks that I speak to, some of you like it, some of you aren't so crazy about it, but I think most people I know have probably backed a game on Kickstarter at some point or another. And increasingly, really big games and big publishers use Kickstarter for releasing their games. And, I've been a user of Kickstarter for a very long time. I initially got really interested in it for the tech and other sort of innovative projects and products that were released through it many years ago. But it seems to be that board games have really taken over the platform as a product line. And, I think just from an innovation perspective, that's really interesting. But without further ado, why don't we jump into 5 games that I wanted to talk about this week? And let's start that off with the Claudus Collection being launched by Colossal Games. It's only got about 62 hours left to go, so coming to the end with this one really now. But it seems that what you get here is a sequence of 3 different games, The Merchants of Mazuris, Keep, and Neolithic. 3 card-based games. I've watched playthroughs for each of these, and they all seem very different. And different artwork styles as well, but they actually look like very clever card games. I was really impressed from the playthroughs that I watched, and actually the value for money here is pretty good. To get 3 games for around $50 or roughly around £40 here in the UK, it is pretty decent, and I'm sure this will likely end up costing more in retail, but these do all 3 games look very different and distinct. And as I said, for card games, it seems that they have quite a lot of depth of play to them. And being sort of a board game minimalist with a very limited amount of shelf space, I'm always interested to see card games and small box games that can pack a punch above their weight level. I tend to find these games are good value for money. They're easy to transport. They're easy to teach. And when you can get that balance just right of there being enough meat on the bone, so to speak, with the game that you're playing, while it's still being in that small box package, that's really interesting. So again, there's a couple of playthroughs here. I've watched all these. Again, these games look very interesting. Do check them out if it looks like something you're interested in, but there's only about 62 hours to go as of now. So yeah, hopefully if you're interested, you don't miss that one. The next one is a big one, Suburbia Collector's Edition. Now, Suburbia is a game that I owned and played for quite some time, and it's one that I really enjoyed. I think amongst city building games, it's got a little bit of a legendary reputation, and it is really a very solid game. However, I did let this one out of my collection, let it go out of my collection late last year, primarily because it didn't really play so well at 2, and I kind of felt that it was, for what it was in terms of complexity of play, or let's say richness of gameplay experience, it was kind of a complicated game to teach and get set up. Again, as with any time I've expressed a view that a game has been kind of complicated to set up or teach or whatever, people have tended to, some people have tended to laugh that off. But again, this is all told from my experience and my perspective. But especially when you start trying to explain to people the different effects of tiles, how they, they sort of interact with each other, which, by the way, is very clever. I think one of the great things about this game is that, unlike a lot of other Euro games, you do have interaction that happens across players and with different tiles that you're building up in your own city space. And so it is a really solid game. I just didn't think it worked as well as 2, very simply because the more players you have, the more interactions you have, which makes a lot of sense. But now we're looking at a deluxe version of the game with bigger tiles, really beautiful looking new artwork, improved components, some expanded content, and different features. A really amazing, mind-blowing looking tower here for distributing and managing the tiles, which is really will help in terms of setup and sort of takedown of the game as well. So it looks really, really cool, and I think if it's something, if Suburbia is a game on your radar for a while and you wanted to get into it, this is pretty much a no-brainer. For me personally, I don't know if I'm going to be backing this one, just because I think fundamentally the game for me, Suburbia, doesn't work as well at 2. I was kind of hoping when I heard this game teased a couple of months ago that there would be slightly more of a radical change to it, although to be fair, there is an entire new expansion coming included in this, as well as some city-specific starting player boards. But I was hoping perhaps it wouldn't actually be just a reprint of Suburbia with more content, but perhaps a new game in the Suburbia line, maybe something with a slightly more interesting 2-player rules. But this is a very, very tempting game to back. I haven't hit the trigger just yet, but again, if you're interested in this game or you had it on your radar, it's probably worth checking out. And again, I'll let you guys know if I end up pulling the trigger or not, but it does look mouth-wateringly beautiful. So that's Suburbia, the Collector's Edition. Now, moving on to another game that I don't know that much about, Vindication. I've seen the coverage of this game by people like the Dice Tower Man versus People and Verado, very handily listed there to remind me. But it looks like a Euro game with a lot of thematic flavor built in. I actually quite like the look of the board here. The hexagonal shaped board is pretty cool. But you have your kind of cubes there to very clearly remind you that this is a Euro game. Beautiful artwork. I think the general theme is that you're a disgraced character in a fantasy universe, and you have to make your way back to honor and redevelop your abilities and powers and restore your honor. So it looks like there's things like movement and companions that you can have as you're playing across this game. Again, it does have Euro dynamics to it, which I think is important for a lot of players, for me as well, actually. And I really like these games where you kind of have this hybrid of Euro mechanisms and more Ameritrash flavor. I'm not really a big fan of that Ameritrash term, to be honest with you, in one sense, because I find it kind of restricting, because it's sort of used as a catch-all term for a game having like narrative or story to it, which I think we should be able to say that about board games without necessarily having to use the term Ameritrash. But I posted on Twitter a couple of weeks back how I thought that games like Blood Rage and Rising Sun were very much Euro games at their core, but had a very nice layer of thematic, narrative-driven gameplay layered across the top. This seems to have that in spades, and I think when you have that combination of the Euro mechanisms that give you solid gameplay with some rich narrative, it's just a fantastic combination. So this game doesn't have very long left either. 8 days to go on this one. So again, this is one that I'm personally debating. I'm trying not to buy too many board games this year, but it's just not easy. In fact, just as a side note, I don't know what's going on, but it seems like Kickstarter has just blown up over the past couple of weeks. There was a bit of a lull over the Christmas break, obviously, but in the past couple of weeks, it just seems like it's gone crazy. And a couple of people on Twitter had suggested that potentially this was to get games ready in time, funded and ready in time for later releases such as Essen, which makes perfect sense and is a very logical conclusion. But be interesting to see if this is just a blip that these games are being prepped for Essen, or if this is just a natural growth in the use of Kickstarter as a board game launching mechanism. So anyway, that's just an aside note, but Vindication looks beautiful. Some of the big names out there have said it, they think this is a great game, so one to look out for. Okay, so the next game I wanted to take a look at was The City by Tom Lehman, and I believe this game is an update of an older game, but it was actually re-released relatively recently as the game Jump Drive in the Race for the Galaxy family of games. And so I think the principle here is going to be very similar, whereby you'll have different cards that have different effects and different impacts. You're trying to build an engine and take specific actions with your card engine to build out the most valuable city. Pretty simple game, I think, but I actually really like the artwork here, and I don't know exactly what it is, but the iconography actually looks more approachable and more straightforward for somebody like myself who has very little familiarity with the Race for the Galaxy family of games. So this one has only relatively recently come online, but it doesn't actually have that much time left to go, only 10 days. Price point seems pretty reasonable to come into this game, $27, 21 quid here in the UK. So this is one I'm actually quite interested in, because I find that the theme of city building is a little bit more accessible for non-gamers. I tend to play a lot of games with my wife, games that play well at 2 or have less, let's say, polarizing themes like high fantasy or sci-fi tend to work a little bit better. So this is one that I've definitely got my eye on. But yeah, I think if you're a fan of the designer, I mean, he's obviously got a great pedigree and a great stable of games behind him. But I think this is one that's probably a good one to check out if you're interested in that world. And one thing I would note, that if you're based in the US, they're actually doing a crazy reward where you can get about 20 games from this specific series of games to put on your bookshelf. I mean, it costs a pretty penny, $400, £300 here in the UK, but yeah, that's pretty impressive that you could pretty much get this whole back catalog of games, and there's some newer ones there as well, like Fleet the Dice game, but that's pretty cool. So I think worth checking out there for sure. The last game I want to look at here in the series is Shake Up. And I don't know much about the designers or the publishers of this game. It's an Asian publisher, I believe. Oh yeah, Singapore, it says right there. And this seems to be a reverse deck builder set in the corporate environment of an IT company. And basically what happens is you're shedding cards, and as you're doing that, you're kind of building out a bit of an engine to focus on different things, different functions within a modern day company. And first of all, I really love deck builders, so having reverse deck builder is an interesting one, although I know there's a couple other games that do that. For example, Find Sand, a relatively recent release, does that as well. But you're looking at the same family of games. Deck builders, be they reverse or regular in their direction of play, are from a similar family, so that's interesting to me. I also quite like this artwork. It's very clean and plain. It does remind me quite a bit of 1950s, 60s style cartoon illustrations or poster design, which is great. And I also think the theme is pretty interesting. It's pretty different. We don't tend to get too many themes based around the corporate world, corporate sort of environment, which is cool. And again, it's perhaps going to be one of those themes that is not as polarizing as high fantasy, sci-fi, etc., etc. So yeah, I think this could be quite an interesting one. Not too much time to go, 15 days, a bit more than some of the other campaigns we've seen on here, but I think this is definitely one to check out. There's been some playthroughs. I've watched a couple of playthroughs here online, which look really cool. Again, just to reiterate, I like small box games. You'll notice that in this selection of games, 3 out of 5 have been small box games, and the 2 other ones have been slightly larger games. But this just looks cool. One worth checking out. So these are the 5 key games that I'm looking at this time around this week in Kick the Cardboard. There are plenty of other games out there on Kickstarter, and the ones that I've left out are not because I don't like them or not interested in them, but there's some that have come on more recently that I'll perhaps cover in next week's episode of the show. But these are the ones I wanted to bring to people's attention this week. Just to clarify, I'm not involved with these publishers in any way, shape, or form. I haven't been sent any preview copies. I haven't received any kind of compensation to cover these games. This is just something I'm doing because I'm interested in the new games that are coming out on Kickstarter. I wanted to share some of my thoughts and feelings about these games. So let me know what you guys think. You can find me on Twitter at GameMinimalist, all one word. Let me know your thoughts. Let me know your views, or here in the comments on YouTube. Which games are you excited about? I'd really love to know. So in the meantime, enjoy your gaming. Bye-bye.